Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I've been driving trucks for nearly 15 years now. Long hauls, mostly. Coast to coast, empty highways. Stretches of road where you don't see another soul for hours. You get used to the loneliness. You get used to the hum of the engine, the static on the radio, the way the white lines blur together under your headlights. But there are some nights that stay with you. Nights that make you question what you saw, what you heard, and whether you should have just kept driving. This happened about 3 years ago, late October. I was hauling a load of furniture from Sacramento to Kansas City. It was one of those routes I'd done 100 times before, straight shot through Nevada, into Utah, then cutting across Colorado. Nothing glamorous, just miles and miles of empty desert and the occasional truck stop. I'd left Sacramento around 6 in the evening, planning to drive through the night and catch some sleep somewhere in Utah by morning. By the time I hit Route 50 in Nevada, it was past midnight. If you've never driven Route 50, let me tell you, it's called the loneliest road in America for a reason. There's nothing out there. No towns, no gas stations, just scrub brush and darkness stretching out in every direction. The kind of place where your phone loses signal and the radio turns to static. It's eerie, but I'd driven it enough times that it didn't bother me anymore. Or at least it didn't used to. I was about 30 miles outside of Ely when I saw him. At first, I thought it was a reflector post or maybe a piece of debris on the side of the road. But as my headlights got closer, I realized it was a person. A man standing on the shoulder, his arm stuck out with his thumb up. Hitchhiking. In the middle of nowhere. At 1 in the morning. Now, I don't pick up hitchhikers. It's a rule I've had since I started driving. You hear too many stories. People getting robbed, assaulted. Worse. But something about this guy made me slow down. Maybe it was the way he was standing there, perfectly still, not waving or moving, just waiting. Or maybe it was the fact that there was nothing around for miles. No broken down car, no campsite, no reason for anyone to be out there. I pulled over. I don't know why. Looking back, I wish I hadn't. But in that moment, something in my gut told me I should stop. Maybe I felt sorry for him. Maybe I was curious. Maybe I was just tired and not thinking straight. I rolled down the passenger window as he approached. The dome light in the cab flickered on, and I got my first good look at him. He was tall, maybe 6'2", wearing a faded denim jacket and jeans that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. His face was gaunt, hollow-cheeked, with deep-set eyes that seemed to catch the light in an odd way. He didn't smile, didn't say anything, just stood there, looking at me. "You need a ride?" I asked, my voice sounding louder than I intended in the silence. He nodded once, slow and deliberate. "Where are you headed?" He paused, then said, "East." That was it. Just east. No town, no destination. His voice was flat, almost emotionless, like he was reading from a script. I should have driven off right then. But I didn't. I unlocked the door and told him to get in. He climbed into the cab without a word, shutting the door behind him with a soft click. The air inside the truck suddenly felt colder, heavier. I glanced over at him as I shifted back into gear. He was staring straight ahead, hands folded in his lap, not moving, not blinking. "So, what were you doing out here?" I asked, trying to make conversation. "Car break down or something?" He didn't answer right away, just kept staring at the windshield. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he said, "Walking. Walking, out here, in the middle of the night." He nodded again. I didn't press him. Something about the way he spoke, or didn't speak, made me uncomfortable. I turned my attention back to the road, telling myself I'd drop him off at the next town and be done with it. We drove in silence for about 10 minutes. The only sounds were the rumble of the engine and the occasional crackle of static from the radio. I kept glancing over at him out of the corner of my eye. He hadn't moved, hadn't adjusted his position, hadn't looked around. Nothing. He just sat there, staring straight ahead like a statue. Then, out of nowhere, he spoke. "You ever see something you can't explain?" His voice was so sudden, so unexpected that I actually flinched. "What?" I said, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. "Something that doesn't make sense. Something that shouldn't be there." I didn't know how to respond. My mind raced, trying to figure out if this was some kind of setup, if he was about to pull a weapon or something. But he still hadn't moved. Still hadn't looked at me. I don't know what you mean," I said carefully. He turned his head then, slowly, and looked directly at me. His eyes were wrong. I don't know how else to describe it. They were too dark, too empty, like looking into a well with no bottom. "You will," he said. A chill ran down my spine. I felt my palms start to sweat. The air in the cab seemed to get even colder. I wanted to pull over, tell him to get out, but something stopped me. Fear, maybe. Or the sense that doing so would make things worse. I focused on the road, trying to ignore him. The white lines blurred together. The darkness outside pressed against the windows, and then I saw it. Up ahead, in the middle of the road, there was something. At first I thought it was an animal, a deer or a coyote. But as I got closer, I realized it was a person, a woman, standing in the center of the highway facing us. She was wearing a white dress that seemed to glow in the headlights. Her hair was long and dark, hanging down over her face. She wasn't moving. I slammed on the brakes. The truck screeched to a halt, the tires skidding on the asphalt. My heart was pounding in my chest. I stared at the woman through the windshield, waiting for her to move, to run, to do something, but she just stood there. "What the hell?" I muttered under my breath. I turned to look at the hitchhiker to see if he was seeing the same thing I was, but he was gone. The passenger seat was empty. I blinked, my mind struggling to catch up. He'd been sitting right there not 5 seconds ago. The door hadn't opened. I hadn't heard anything, but he was gone. I looked back at the road. The woman was gone too. The highway was empty, nothing but darkness and the faint hum of the wind. I sat there for a long time, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Eventually, I forced myself to keep driving. I didn't stop again until I reached the truck stop in Ely, and even then, I couldn't sleep. I just sat in the diner, drinking coffee, replaying the whole thing in my head. I never saw the hitchhiker again. I never saw the woman in the white dress. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving through empty stretches of highway, I think about what he said. "You will," and I wonder if I already have. I used to think truck stops were all the same. Fluorescent lights, greasy food, stale coffee, and a few weary drivers trying to catch a couple of hours of sleep in their cabs. They're not glamorous, but they're reliable. A place to refuel, grab a bite, and stretch your legs before hitting the road again. But there's one truck stop I'll never forget. One that I'll never go back to, no matter how desperate I am for gas or rest. It was somewhere in eastern Montana, off Interstate 94. I'd been driving for almost 12 hours straight, hauling a load of machinery parts from Spokane to Minneapolis. It was late February, and a winter storm had been chasing me across the state. The snow was coming down heavy, and visibility was getting worse by the minute. I knew I needed to pull over before things got too dangerous, so when I saw the exit sign for a truck stop, I took it without hesitation. The exit ramp was barely plowed, and my tires crunched through a layer of ice and snow as I made my way down. The truck stop was about a quarter-mile off the highway, tucked away behind a cluster of trees. As I got closer, I noticed something odd. There were no lights. The sign at the entrance was dark, and the parking lot was empty. No trucks, no cars, nothing. I hesitated for a moment, my foot hovering over the brake. But the storm was getting worse, and I didn't have much choice. I needed to wait it out somewhere safe. I figured maybe the power was out, or maybe it was just a slow night. I pulled into the lot and parked near the main building. The truck stop looked old, like it had been around since the 70s. The paint on the walls was peeling, and the windows were covered in a thick layer of grime. There was a faded sign above the entrance that read, "Rocky's Rest Stop," with a cartoon truck driver giving a thumbs up. It looked cheerful in a creepy, outdated kind of way. I killed the engine and sat there for a minute, listening to the wind howl outside. The snow was piling up fast, coating the windshield in a thick blanket of white. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove box and climbed out of the cab. The cold hit me like a punch to the face. The wind was brutal, cutting through my jacket and making my eyes water. I pulled my hood up and made my way toward the building, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the falling snow. The front door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped inside, shaking the snow off my boots. The interior was dark, lit only by the weak glow of my flashlight. The air smelled stale, like old grease and mildew. I could see rows of empty shelves, a dusty counter with an ancient cash register, and a few overturned chairs scattered around the dining area. It looked like the place had been abandoned for years. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing through the empty building. No response. I made my way toward the counter, shining my light around. There were papers scattered across the surface, receipts, invoices, a handwritten note. That was too faded to read. Behind the counter, there was a doorway leading to what looked like a back room. The door was ajar, and I could see darkness beyond it. I didn't want to go back there. Every instinct told me to turn around, get back in my truck, and take my chances with the storm. But something kept me there. Curiosity, maybe. Or stupidity. I pushed the door open and stepped into the back room. It was a small storage area, lined with metal shelves that were mostly empty. There were a few boxes stacked in the corner, covered in dust. And in the center of the room, there was a desk with an old rotary phone sitting on top of it. The phone was off the hook, the receiver dangling by its cord, swaying slightly as if someone had just been holding it. I walked over and picked up the receiver, holding it to my ear. Static. Just endless, crackling static. I hung it up and took a step back, feeling a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. They were coming from somewhere above me. Slow, deliberate, like someone pacing back and forth. I looked up at the ceiling, following the sound. The footsteps moved from one side of the room to the other, and then stopped. Silence. I stood there, my heart pounding, waiting for something to happen. The building was supposed to be empty. There were no other vehicles outside, no signs of life. But someone, or something, was up there. I backed toward the door, keeping my eyes on the ceiling. The footsteps started again, this time moving toward the stairs. I could hear the creak of old wood, the faint scrape of shoes on the steps. I didn't wait to see who or what it was. I bolted out of the back room, through the main area, and out the front door. The cold air hit me again, but I barely felt it. I ran to my truck, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the door open. I climbed inside, locked the doors, and started the engine. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced in the rearview mirror. There was someone standing in the doorway of the truck stop. A figure, silhouetted against the darkness inside. They weren't moving, just standing there, watching me leave. I floored the gas pedal and didn't look back. I drove through the storm for another hour before I found another place to stop. A well-lit, busy truck stop with other drivers and a functioning coffee machine. I sat there until morning, trying to convince myself that I'd imagined the whole thing. That the footsteps were just the building settling, that the figure in the doorway was a trick of the light. But I know what I heard, I know what I saw, and I'll never take that exit again. There's a rest area off Interstate 80 in Wyoming that I used to stop at all the time. It's nothing special, just a small parking lot with a couple of picnic tables, a bathroom facility, and a scenic overlook that gives you a view of the plains stretching out for miles. I'd been stopping there for years, usually late at night when I needed a quick break to stretch my legs and clear my head. It was always quiet, always empty, a good place to decompress after hours on the road. But that changed one night in early spring. I was hauling a load of electronics from San Francisco to Chicago. It was around 2 in the morning when I pulled into the rest area. The parking lot was empty except for one other vehicle, a beat-up sedan parked near the bathroom. I didn't think much of it. People stop at rest areas all the time, even in the middle of the night. I parked my truck and climbed out, taking a deep breath of the cool night air. The sky was clear and the stars were bright, casting just enough light to see by. I walked over to one of the picnic tables and sat down, rubbing my eyes. I was exhausted. My back ached from sitting in the same position for hours, and my mind was foggy from the monotony of the highway. That's when I saw her. She was standing near the edge of the overlook, maybe 50 feet away. A young woman, maybe in her early 20s, wearing a light jacket and jeans. Her back was to me, and she was staring out at the plains. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Figured she was just a traveler, taking in the view like I was. But then I noticed something odd. She wasn't moving, not at all. She just stood there, perfectly still, her arms at her sides. No shifting weight, no looking around, nothing. It was unnatural. I watched her for a minute, waiting for her to move. When she didn't, I called out, "You okay over there?" She didn't respond, didn't even turn her head. A chill ran through me. I got up from the picnic table and started walking toward her slowly. The closer I got, the more uneasy I felt. There was something wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it, but every instinct was telling me to turn around and get back in my truck. I stopped about 10 feet away from her. "Miss, are you all right?" Still nothing. I took another step closer. That's when I saw her reflection in the glass barrier at the edge of the overlook. She was smiling, not a normal smile. A wide, unnatural grin that stretched across her face, showing too many teeth. Her eyes were open, but they weren't looking at the view. They were looking directly at me, reflected in the glass. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering in my chest. She still hadn't moved. Her back was still to me, but I could see that horrifying smile in the reflection. "What the hell?" I whispered. Slowly, she began to turn around. I didn't wait to see her face. I ran. I sprinted back to my truck, my boots pounding against the pavement. I could hear her behind me, footsteps soft and steady. Like she was walking, not running, but they were getting closer. I reached my truck and yanked the door open, diving inside. I locked the doors and fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I threw the truck into gear. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I looked in the side mirror. She was standing in the middle of the lot, watching me go. Her face was pale, almost luminous in the moonlight, and she was still smiling. I drove for hours without stopping. I didn't care about being tired. I didn't care about the ache in my back or the fog in my head. I just wanted to get as far away from that rest area as possible. I've never stopped there again. I don't even drive past it if I can help it, because I know she's still there, waiting, and I know that if I ever go back, she'll be smiling. If you're still listening, You probably enjoy stories like this. A like or a comment helps keep them alive. You hear a lot of stories on the CB radio when you're a trucker. Most of them are bullshit. Tall tales to pass the time, exaggerations to make a boring night shift sound more interesting. But every now and then, you hear something that makes you think. Something that sticks with you long after the static fades and the channel goes quiet. This happened about 5 years ago, somewhere in New Mexico. I was driving through the night on Interstate 40, heading east toward Albuquerque. It was a clear night, no traffic, just me and the empty highway. I had the CB on, tuned to channel 19 like always, listening to the occasional chatter from other drivers. Around midnight, I started hearing something strange. A group of truckers were talking about a convoy, 3 trucks traveling together, all hauling loads from Phoenix to Dallas. They were calling themselves the Night Riders, which I thought was a little cheesy. But whatever. They were joking around, keeping each other awake, the usual stuff. I didn't pay much attention at first, but as the night went on, I kept hearing them pop up on the channel. They were somewhere ahead of me, maybe 20 or 30 miles, based on the mile markers they were calling out. They sounded like they were having a good time, laughing and cracking jokes. It was nice, in a way. Made the lonely highway feel a little less empty. Then, around 1:30 in the morning, things changed. One of the drivers, his handle was Big Tex, came on the radio, and his voice sounded different. Strained, nervous. "Hey, anyone else seeing this?" There was a pause. Then another voice chimed in. "Seeing what?" "The lights. Off to the north. You guys see 'em?" I glanced out my driver's side window. I couldn't see anything but darkness and the faint outline of distant mountains. But I kept listening. "Yeah, I see 'em," a third voice said. This one sounded younger, maybe early 20s. "What are those? Looks like headlights, but they're way out there, middle of nowhere." "Could be a ranch," Big Tex said, though he didn't sound convinced. "Ain't no ranches out here," the younger guy replied. "Not this far off the road." They went quiet for a minute. I kept driving, my eyes flicking between the road and the darkness to my left. I still couldn't see anything. Then Big Tex came back on, and this time his voice was tight. "They're moving, the lights, they're following us." "What do you mean, following?" the third driver asked. "I mean they're pacing us. We're doing 70, and they're keeping up, parallel to the highway." I felt a knot form in my stomach. I don't know why, but something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. "Maybe it's just another truck," the younger guy offered, though he sounded uncertain. "There ain't no roads over there," Big Tex said. "Just desert." They kept talking, their voices getting more and more uneasy. The lights were still there, still keeping pace with them. They tried slowing down, speeding up, but the lights matched them every time. Then, suddenly, the younger guy's voice cut through the static, sharp and panicked. "They're getting closer." "What?" "The lights, they're coming toward the highway." There was a burst of static, then silence. I waited, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my eyes glued to the road ahead. I kept expecting to hear them come back on, to hear Big Tex crack a joke and tell everyone to calm down. But the channel stayed quiet. Minutes passed. Then 10 minutes, then 20. Nothing. I reached for the CB and keyed the mic. "Hey, Night Riders, you guys still out there?" Silence. I tried again. "Big Tex, you copy?" Still nothing. I felt a chill run down my spine. I told myself they'd just switched channels, or maybe their radios had cut out. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I kept driving, scanning the road ahead for any sign of them. About 30 miles later, I saw something that made my blood run cold. 3 trucks parked on the shoulder of the highway, the Night Riders' convoy. but they were empty. I slowed down as I passed them, my heart pounding. The trucks were all there, perfectly intact, their hazard lights still blinking. But there was no sign of the drivers, no one in the cabs, no one standing nearby. Just 3 empty trucks sitting on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down more than I had to. I just kept driving, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I reported it when I got to Albuquerque, told the dispatcher what I'd heard on the CB, what I'd seen on the highway. They said they'd send someone to check it out. A few days later, I heard the trucks had been towed, but the drivers were never found. No bodies, no signs of struggle, no clues. They just disappeared. I still drive that stretch of I-40 sometimes. And every time I do, I keep the CB on, listening, waiting. Part of me hopes I'll hear Big Tex's voice again, cracking jokes and calling out mile markers. But part of me is terrified that I will. Way stations are a necessary evil when you're a trucker. You pull in, get your rig weighed, make sure you're not over the legal limit, and then you're on your way. Most of them are pretty straightforward, busy during the day, quiet at night, staffed by bored DOT officers who just want to get through their shift. I've been through hundreds of them over the years, and they've all blurred together into one generic memory. All except one. It was in northern Idaho, off Highway 95. I'd been driving through the night, hauling a load of timber from Coeur d'Alene to Lewiston. It was late October, and the temperature had dropped significantly after sunset. A thick fog had rolled in, blanketing the highway and making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. I was taking it slow, my eyes straining to pick out the white lines on the road. Around 3 in the morning, I saw the sign for a way station up ahead. I groaned. I was exhausted, and the last thing I wanted was to deal with paperwork in the middle of the night. But I didn't have a choice. If I skipped it and got caught, I'd be looking at a hefty fine. So I took the exit and pulled into the way station. The place was deserted. The fog was even thicker here, swirling around the empty lot like something alive. The scale house was dark, no lights on inside. I frowned. Way stations were usually closed at night unless they were doing random checks, but the sign had said, "Open." I figured maybe the officer was on a break or something. I pulled onto the scale and waited. The protocol was to sit there until the officer came out and gave you the all clear. But after a few minutes, no one showed up. I glanced at the scale house. Still dark. No movement. I keyed my CB, trying to raise someone. "Hey, this is a driver at the Highway 95 way station. Anybody there?" Static. I waited another few minutes, then decided to get out and see if I could find someone. I climbed down from the cab and walked toward the scale house, my boots crunching on the gravel. The fog was so thick I could barely see the building until I was right in front of it. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The interior was small and cramped. A desk, a couple of chairs, a computer that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 90s. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust, like no one had been there in weeks, maybe months. "Hello," I called out. No answer. I walked over to the desk and looked at the paperwork scattered across it. Most of it was old, inspection forms, weight receipts, all dated from months ago. I picked up one of the sheets and squinted at it in the dim light. The date was from 1987. I blinked, thinking I'd read it wrong. But no, it was definitely 1987. I shuffled through the other papers. All of them were from the 80s. Some even earlier. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I dropped the papers and backed toward the door. Something was very wrong here. That's when I heard the voice. "You're overweight." I spun around. There was a man standing in the doorway. He was wearing a doughty uniform, khaki pants, a button-up shirt, a badge clipped to his belt, but something about him was off. His face was pale, almost grey, and his eyes had a dull, lifeless quality to them. He stared at me without blinking. "What?" I said, my voice shaking. "Your truck. It's overweight. You'll need to offload." I don't think." "Offload," he repeated, his tone flat and emotionless. "Or you don't leave." I felt a surge of panic. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but the way he was looking at me made my blood run cold. I nodded quickly and backed out of the scale house, never taking my eyes off him. I hurried back to my truck and climbed inside, locking the doors behind me. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. I didn't care about the weigh-in, didn't care about the fine I'd probably get. I just wanted to get out of there. As I pulled off the scale and headed for the exit, I looked in my rearview mirror. The man was standing in the middle of the lot, watching me. He didn't move, didn't wave, just stood there, his pale face barely visible through the fog. I floored the gas pedal and didn't stop until I was miles down the road. The next day, I looked up that way station online. According to the state's website, it had been decommissioned in 1989. It hadn't been operational for over 30 years. The CB radio is a trucker's lifeline. It's how we communicate with each other, share information about traffic, weather, speed traps. It's how we pass the time on long, lonely stretches of highway. Most of the chatter is mundane. Drivers complaining about their dispatchers, swapping stories, asking about the best places to stop for food. But every now and then, you hear something that doesn't quite fit. Something that makes you wonder if you're losing your mind. I heard one of those voices about 2 years ago. I was driving through West Texas on Interstate 10, heading from El Paso to San Antonio. It was a brutally hot August night, the kind where the air shimmers even in the darkness, and the asphalt feels like it's melting beneath your tire. I had the AC cranked up in the Cybe on, listening to the occasional trucker checking in from somewhere down the line. Around midnight, the chatter died down. The highway was empty, and it seemed like I was the only one out there. I was starting to drift a little, my eyes heavy, when a voice crackled through the speaker. "Driver eastbound on I-10, you need to turn around." I perked up, suddenly alert. The voice was male, deep and rough, like someone who'd been smoking for 40 years. But there was something else in it. An urgency that made my heart rate pick up. I grabbed the mic. "This is eastbound I-10. Who's this?" "Doesn't matter who I am. You need to turn around, now." I glanced at my GPS. I was about 60 miles outside of Fort Stockton in the middle of nowhere. There was nothing around, no towns, no rest stops, just empty desert. "Turn around. Why? What's going on?" There was a long pause, filled with static. Then the voice came back, quieter this time. "You'll see. About 30 miles ahead. Don't go any further." What am I going to see? No response. Just silence. I waited, my hand still on the mic, but the voice didn't come back. I tried calling out a few more times, asking if anyone else had heard the transmission, but no one answered. It was like the whole channel had gone dead. I told myself it was just some bored trucker messing with me, a prank to kill time. But something about the way he'd said it, the urgency, the fear, stuck with me. I couldn't shake it. I kept driving. About 20 miles later, I started to feel uneasy. The highway seemed darker than usual, the stars above dimmer. The air inside the cab felt heavy, oppressive. I turned the AC up higher, but it didn't help. Then I saw it. Up ahead, on the side of the road, there was something. At first, I thought it was a broken-down truck. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't a truck. It was a pile of wreckage. Twisted metal, shattered glass, scattered debris. It looked like a massive accident had happened there. Multiple vehicles, all torn apart and strewn across the shoulder. But there were no emergency vehicles. No flares, no police cars, no ambulances. Just the wreckage, sitting there in the darkness. I slowed down, my heart pounding. I stared at the scene as I passed, trying to make sense of it. There were pieces of cars, trucks, maybe even a semi, but no bodies, no signs of life, just wreckage. And then I saw the paint. On one of the twisted pieces of metal, I could make out part of a logo. It was faded and scorched, but I recognized it. It was the logo of a trucking company I knew, a company I'd worked for years ago. My company. I felt a chill run through me. I looked closer at the wreckage as I passed, and that's when I saw it. The license plate, partially obscured but still readable. It was my license plate, my truck. I slammed on the brakes, the rig screeching to a halt. I sat there, frozen, staring at the wreckage in my side mirror. It didn't make sense. My truck was fine. I was fine. But that was my truck, torn apart and scattered across the side of the road. The CB crackled to life again. "I told you to turn around." The same voice, the same urgency. "What the hell is this?" I shouted into the mic. "What's going on?" "You weren't supposed to see that." "Not yet." "Not yet? What does that mean?" There was another long pause. Then, quietly, "It hasn't happened yet, but it will if you keep going." My blood ran cold. I stared at the wreckage, then back at the dark highway stretching out ahead of me. "You're saying that's going to happen to me?" "Not if you turn around." I didn't hesitate. I threw the truck into reverse, did a wide U-turn in the middle of the highway, and headed back the way I'd come. I didn't care about the delivery. I didn't care about the schedule. I just wanted to get away from that place. As I drove, I kept glancing in my rear-view mirror, half expecting to see the wreckage disappear. But it stayed there, a twisted monument to something that hadn't happened yet. I never finished that haul. I called my dispatcher from Fort Stockton and told him I was done. Quit on the spot. He wasn't happy, but I didn't care. Because I know what I saw, and I know what that voice was trying to tell me. Some roads aren't meant to be traveled, and some warnings aren't meant to be ignored. There's a diner off Interstate 70 in Kansas that I used to stop at all the time. It was called Rosie's, a classic truck stop diner with red vinyl booths, checkered floors, and waitresses who called everyone Hon. The food was decent, nothing fancy. Just burgers, fries, and coffee strong enough to keep you awake for hours. It was the kind of place that felt timeless, like it had been there forever and would be there long after I was gone. I'd been stopping at Rosie's for about 3 years, always on my runs from Denver to Kansas City. It became a routine. I'd pull in around 2 or 3 in the morning, grab a booth by the window, order a cheeseburger and coffee, and take a break before pushing through to my destination. The staff got to know me. There was a waitress named Linda, who always remembered how I liked my coffee. Black, no sugar, and an old cook named Frank who'd give me an extra side of fries if the place wasn't too busy. But one night, something changed. It was early December, and I'd been driving through a snowstorm for the past 4 hours. By the time I saw the exit for Rosie's, I was exhausted, frozen, and desperate for something hot to eat. I pulled into the parking lot and killed the engine, letting out a long breath. The snow was coming down hard, coating everything in a thick blanket of white. I climbed out of the cab and hurried toward the diner, the wind biting at my face. The neon sign above the entrance flickered slightly, casting a dim red glow over the snow-covered lot. I pushed through the door and stepped inside, grateful for the warmth. The diner was empty. That wasn't unusual for this time of night, but something felt off. The lights were on, the jukebox in the corner was playing some old country song, and there was a pot of coffee brewing behind the counter. But there was no one there. No waitress, no cook, no other customers. Just empty booths and the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing in the silence. No response. I walked over to the counter and peered into the kitchen. It was empty too. There was a burger on the grill, halfway cooked, sizzling quietly. A basket of fries sat under the heat lamp, still hot. It looked like someone had just been there, like they'd stepped away for a moment and would be right back. But no one came. I stood there for a minute, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to leave, to get back in my truck and find another place to stop. But I was cold and hungry, and the smell of that burger was making my stomach growl. I decided to wait. I slid into my usual booth by the window and stared out at the snow. The parking lot was empty except for my truck. No other vehicles. No signs of life. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. I waited for 5 minutes, then 10. Still no one showed up. Finally, I got up and walked back to the counter. "Hello?" I called again, louder this time. "Anyone here?" Still nothing. I was about to leave when I heard footsteps. They were coming from the back of the diner, slow and deliberate. I turned toward the sound, relief washing over me. Finally, someone was here. But when the door to the back room swung open, I froze. It was Linda, the waitress I'd known for years. But something was wrong. Her face was pale, almost gray, and her eyes had a vacant, glassy look to them. She moved stiffly, like a puppet being pulled by strings, and when she smiled at me, it didn't reach her eyes. "Coffee, hun?" she asked, her voice flat and emotionless. "Linda, are you okay?" She didn't respond. Just walked over to the coffee pot, poured a cup, and set it down on the counter in front of me. Her movements were mechanical, robotic. "Linda, what's going on? Where is everyone?" She stared at me for a long moment, her expression blank. Then, slowly, she said, "They're waiting." "Waiting? Who's waiting?" She didn't answer. Just turned and walked back toward the kitchen, disappearing through the swinging door. I grabbed the coffee cup, my hands trembling, and took a sip. It was cold, ice cold, like it had been sitting there for hours. I set the cup down and backed toward the door. Something was very, very wrong. I needed to get out of there. As I reached for the handle, I heard a voice behind me. "You can't leave yet." I spun around. Frank, the old cook, was standing in the doorway to the kitchen. Like Linda, his face was pale and his eyes were empty. He stared at me with that same vacant expression. "Why not?" I asked, my voice shaking. "You haven't finished your meal." I didn't order anything. He pointed toward my booth. I turned to look. There was a plate sitting on the table. A cheeseburger and fries, perfectly arranged, steam rising from the food. I hadn't seen anyone bring it over. I hadn't heard anyone move. I need to go," I said, backing toward the door. Frank took a step forward. "You need to eat." "No, I'm leaving." I yanked the door open and stumbled out into the snow. The cold air hit me like a wall, but I didn't care. I ran to my truck, fumbling with the keys, my heart pounding in my chest. I climbed inside, started the engine, and threw it into gear. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I looked in my rearview mirror. Frank and Linda were standing in the doorway of the diner, watching me. They didn't move, didn't wave, just stood there, their pale faces barely visible in the dim light. I drove for hours without stopping. When the sun finally came up, I pulled over at a different truck stop and looked up Rosie's Diner online. According to the search results, Rosie's had closed down 5 years ago. The building had been abandoned, left to rot on the side of the highway. But I'd been there. I'd been inside. I'd seen Linda and Frank. And I know that if I ever go back, they'll still be waiting. There are some roads that aren't on any map. Roads that don't show up on GPS, that truckers only hear about through whispers and warnings on the CB. roads that you're supposed to avoid, no matter what. I wish I'd listened to those warnings. It was late September, and I was hauling a load of furniture from Nashville to Little Rock. I'd driven the route dozens of times before, straight shot down Interstate 40, about 5 or 6 hours depending on traffic. It was a routine run, nothing special. But about halfway through Arkansas, I hit a problem. There was an accident up ahead, a major pileup that had shut down the entire interstate. Traffic was backed up for miles, and according to the radio, it would be hours before they cleared it. I couldn't afford to wait. I had a tight deadline, and my dispatcher was already breathing down my neck about being late. So I decided to take a detour. I pulled off at the next exit and followed the signs for an alternate route. At first, it was fine. A 2-lane highway that wound through the countryside, past farms and small towns. But as I drove further, the road got narrower, the towns got smaller, and the landscape got darker. By the time the sun set, I was deep in the backwoods of Arkansas, driving through dense forest with no streetlights and no other cars. My GPS had lost signal about 20 miles back, and the road I was on wasn't marked on any of the maps I had with me. I told myself I'd just keep going, that eventually I'd hit another highway or find a town where I could get my bearings. But the road just kept going, and going, and going. I started to feel uneasy. The trees on either side of the road were so thick they seemed to close in around me, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the stars. The only light came from my headlights, cutting through the darkness in narrow beams. Then I saw the sign. It was old and weathered, barely readable in the dim light. But I could make out the words, "Welcome to Ashford, population 47. I'd never heard of Ashford, but at that point, I didn't care. I was just relieved to find some sign of civilization. I slowed down as I entered the town, looking for a gas station or a diner, somewhere I could stop and ask for directions. But Ashford was wrong. The buildings were old, really old, like something out of the early 1900s. There were no streetlights, no power lines, no modern infrastructure. The houses were dark, their windows boarded up or broken. The streets were empty, not a single car, not a single person. It looked like a ghost town. I drove slowly through the main street, my heart pounding. There was a general store, a church, a small schoolhouse. All of them abandoned, falling apart. I kept expecting to see someone, anyone, but the town was completely deserted. At the end of the main street, the road split into 2 directions. There were no signs indicating which way to go. I sat there for a moment, trying to decide when I noticed something. There were lights in the distance. Faint, flickering lights like torches or lanterns. They were coming from the left road, deeper into the forest. Against my better judgment, I turned left. The road got even narrower, the trees even thicker. The lights grew brighter as I approached, and I started to hear something, a low rhythmic sound like chanting. I slowed down, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. And then I saw them. People. They were standing in a clearing just off the road, maybe 20 or 30 of them, all dressed in old-fashioned clothing. They were arranged in a circle, holding candles, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. In the center of the circle was something I couldn't quite make out, a large object covered in a dark cloth. They were chanting in unison, their voices low and haunting. I couldn't understand the words, but the sound sent chills down my spine. I should have turned around. I should have floored it and gotten the hell out of there, but I was frozen, unable to look away. One of the figures turned toward me. I couldn't see their face in the darkness, but I felt their eyes on me. And then, slowly, the others began to turn as well, one by one, until the entire circle was facing my truck. The chanting stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. I threw the truck into reverse and backed up as fast as I could, the tires screeching on the dirt road. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to get away. I drove for what felt like hours, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. Eventually, I found my way back to the interstate. I don't know how. The roads all looked the same, and I was so panicked I wasn't thinking straight, but somehow I made it out. I never told anyone about Ashford. I didn't think they'd believe me. Hell, I'm not sure I believe it myself. But I know what I saw, and I know I'll never take a detour again. There's a legend among truckers about a rig that appears on certain highways late at night. They call it the Phantom Trucker. Some say it's the ghost of a driver who died in a crash decades ago, doomed to roam the highways forever. Others say it's something else entirely. Something that was never human to begin with. I always thought it was just a story, until I saw it myself. It was a cold February night, and I was driving through northern Minnesota on Highway 2. I'd been on the road for almost 14 hours, hauling a load of machinery parts from Duluth to Grand Forks. The highway was dark and empty, with nothing but endless stretches of snow-covered fields on either side. I was tired, really tired. My eyes were heavy, and I kept catching myself drifting. I knew I should pull over and rest, but I was so close to my destination that I figured I could push through. Just another hour, maybe 2. That's when I saw the headlights. They appeared suddenly in my rearview mirror, 2 bright beams cutting through the darkness. I hadn't seen another vehicle in over an hour, so I was surprised to see someone else out there. I glanced at the mirror, trying to get a better look at the truck behind me. It was a semi, just like mine. Old-fashioned, though, one of those boxy models from the 70s or 80s. It was close, maybe 50 feet behind me, and it was gaining fast. I frowned. Highway 2 was a 2-lane road, and there was plenty of room for the truck to pass me. But it just stayed there, riding my tail, its headlights glaring in my mirror. I sped up a little, hoping the driver would back off. But the truck stayed right behind me, matching my speed. I tried the CB radio. "Hey, driver behind me on Highway 2, you're riding a little close there. Everything okay?" Static. I waited a moment, then tried again. Truck behind me. You copy?" Still nothing. I glanced at the mirror again. The truck was even closer now, its headlights so bright I could barely see. I felt a surge of irritation. This was dangerous. If I had to brake suddenly, the truck would slam right into me. I decided to pull over and let them pass. I slowed down and moved toward the shoulder, signaling with my turn indicator. But the truck didn't pass. It slowed down too, staying right behind me. My irritation turned to unease. I stopped on the shoulder, expecting the truck to go around me. But it stopped too, just sat there, idling, its headlights still blazing. I grabbed the CB mic again. "All right, what the hell are you doing? Why are you following me?" Silence. I stared at the mirror, trying to see into the cab of the truck behind me. But the headlights were too bright. I couldn't see anything. I sat there for a minute, my heart pounding, debating what to do. Finally, I decided to get out and confront the driver. Maybe they were having some kind of emergency, or maybe they were just being an asshole. Either way, I needed to know. I climbed down from my cab and walked toward the truck. The cold air bit at my face, and the snow crunched under my boots. I could hear the truck's engine rumbling, a low guttural sound that seemed louder than it should have been. As I got closer, I realized something was wrong. The truck was old. Really old. The paint was faded and peeling, and the body was covered in rust and dents. The windshield was dirty, obscured by layers of grime and frost. I couldn't see anyone inside. "Hey," I called out, knocking on the driver's side door. "You okay in there?" No response. I tried the door handle. It was locked. I stepped back and looked up at the cab. The windows were so dirty I couldn't see through them. But there was something, a shape maybe, behind the glass. A figure, sitting in the driver's seat. "Hello," I called again, louder this time. The engine revved. I stumbled backward as the truck lurched forward, its tires spinning in the snow. It swerved around me and pulled back onto the highway, accelerating rapidly. Within seconds it was gone, disappearing into the darkness. I stood there, breathing hard, my mind racing. What the hell had just happened? I got back in my truck and sat there for a long time, trying to calm down. Eventually, I forced myself to keep driving, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. About 20 miles later, I saw it again. The same truck, same headlights, same rusted body. It was parked on the side of the road up ahead, just sitting there, idling. I felt a chill run down my spine. I slowed down as I approached, half expecting it to pull out and start following me again, but it didn't move, just sat there, its engine rumbling. As I passed it, I glanced over. The cab was empty. No driver, no one inside. But as I looked in my rear-view mirror, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The truck was moving again, and it was following me. I floored the gas pedal, pushing my rig as fast as it would go. The speedometer climbed, 60, 70, 80. But no matter how fast I went, the truck stayed right behind me, its headlights glaring in my mirror. I tried everything, speeding up, slowing down, swerving, braking. Nothing worked. It stayed with me, relentless, like it was tethered to my truck by some invisible chain. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. I blinked, checking the mirror. The road behind me was empty. No headlights, no truck, nothing. I pulled over and sat there, shaking, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I never saw the truck again that night. But I've seen it since. Sometimes, late at night when I'm driving through empty stretches of highway, I'll see those headlights appear in my mirror, and I know, without a doubt, that it's the phantom trucker, and I know that one day it's going to catch me. Most of the time, I don't ask questions about what I'm hauling. It's not my job to know. My job is to pick up the load, drive it to its destination, and get paid. As long as the paperwork checks out and the weight is legal, I don't care if I'm hauling furniture, electronics, or canned goods. But there was one load I wish I'd asked about. It was late summer, and I got a call from my dispatcher about a special delivery. The pay was good, really good, almost double what I'd normally make for a run of that distance. The only catch was that I had to pick up the load at midnight and deliver it by sunrise. No stops, no delays. The pickup location was an old warehouse on the outskirts of Omaha, Nebraska. I'd never been there before, and when I pulled up, I understood why. The place looked abandoned. The building was surrounded by a chain-link fence, and most of the windows were boarded up. There were no lights on inside, no signs of activity. I sat in my truck for a minute, debating whether to get out, but the pay was too good to pass up. I climbed down and walked over to the gate. It was unlocked. I pushed it open and made my way toward the warehouse. The only sound was the crunch of gravel under my boots and the distant hum of the highway. I reached the loading dock and found a man waiting for me. He was tall and thin, dressed in dark clothes, his face hidden in shadow. "You the driver?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "I'm here for the pickup." He nodded and gestured toward a large crate sitting on a pallet. It was maybe 6 feet long and 3 feet wide, wrapped in thick plastic and secured with metal straps. There was no label, no markings, nothing to indicate what was inside. "That's it," he said. "Get it loaded and get moving. You've got 6 hours." "What's in it?" I asked. He stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Doesn't matter. Just make sure it gets there." I didn't like the way he said it, but I didn't argue. I backed my truck up to the dock, lowered the lift gate, and got the crate loaded. It was heavy, really heavy, heavier than I'd expected. By the time I had it secured in the trailer, I was sweating. The man handed me an envelope with the delivery address and the paperwork. "Drive straight there. No stops, no detours. And whatever you do, don't open the crate." "Why would I open it?" I asked, half joking. He didn't smile. "Just don't." I climbed back into my truck and pulled out of the lot, the man's words echoing in my head. "Don't open the crate." I drove through the night, heading south on Highway 75 toward Kansas City. The roads were empty, and the air was warm and still. Everything seemed normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Around 3 in the morning, I started to hear it, a sound coming from the trailer. At first, I thought it was just the crate shifting, the metal straps creaking under the weight. But as I listened closer, I realized it wasn't that. It was tapping. Slow, rhythmic, tapping, like someone knocking on wood. I told myself it was nothing. Just the cargo settling, or maybe something else in the trailer making noise, but the tapping continued, steady and persistent. Then it got louder. I pulled over to the side of the road and killed the engine. The silence that followed was deafening. I sat there for a moment, listening. The tapping had stopped. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed out of the cab. I walked around to the back of the trailer and opened the doors, shining my light inside. The crate was still there, still secured to the pallet. Nothing looked out of place, but as I stared at it, I felt a chill run down my spine. There was something moving inside. I could see it through the gaps in the plastic, a faint, shifting shadow, like something was pressing against the sides of the crate from the inside. "Whatever you do, don't open the crate." The man's words echoed in my head. I backed away from the trailer, my heart pounding. I didn't know what was in that crate, and I didn't want to know. I closed the doors, got back in my truck, and kept driving. The tapping started again about an hour later. This time it was accompanied by something else. A low, guttural sound, like breathing, heavy, labored breathing coming from inside the crate. I turned the radio up, trying to drown it out, but I could still hear it, faint but unmistakable. By the time I reached the delivery location, a nondescript building on the outskirts of Kansas City, I was a wreck. My hands were shaking and my shirt was soaked with sweat. I backed up to the loading dock and waited. A group of men came out, dressed in dark clothes, their faces expressionless. They unloaded the crate quickly and efficiently, not saying a word to me. I didn't ask questions. I just handed over the paperwork, took my payment, and got the hell out of there. I never found out what was in that crate, and I never took another job like that again. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear it. That tapping, that breathing. And I wonder what I was really hauling that night. They say every trucker has a last stop, a place where the road ends, where the journey is over. Some drivers reach it after decades on the road, retiring to a quiet life with their families. Others reach it in a hospital bed, worn down by years of long hauls and sleepless nights. But some drivers reach their last stop in a different way, and I think I'm about to reach mine. It started about a week ago. I was driving through South Dakota on Interstate 90, heading from Sioux Falls to Rapid City. It was a clear night, no traffic, just me and the open road. I'd made this run 100 times before. I knew every mile marker, every exit, every curve in the highway. But something was different. Around mile marker 220, I started to notice something strange. The road looked wrong. The white lines seemed to shimmer, like they were moving, and the asphalt had a strange, oily sheen to it. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was just tired. But the longer I looked, the worse it got. And then I saw the sign. It was a highway sign, just like any other, except it didn't make sense. It read, "Last stop, 5 miles." I'd never seen that sign before. There was no town at mile marker 225, no rest area, no gas station, just empty plains. I figured it was a mistake, maybe a prank, and kept driving. But 5 miles later, I saw it. A truck stop. It appeared out of nowhere, sitting on the side of the highway like it had always been there. The parking lot was full of trucks, dozens of them, all lined up in neat rows. The building was lit up, bright and welcoming, with a neon sign that read, "The Last Stop." I frowned. I'd driven this route countless times, and I'd never seen this place before. But I was low on fuel, and my legs were cramping from sitting too long. I decided to pull in. The parking lot was eerily quiet. Despite all the trucks, there was no one around. No drivers, no mechanics, no attendants. Just rows and rows of empty cabs, their engines silent. I parked and climbed out, stretching my legs. The air was still and cold, and there was a strange smell, something metallic like rust and oil. I walked toward the main building, my footsteps echoing on the pavement. The front door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The interior looked like any other truck stop. A convenience store, a diner, a few aisles of snacks and supplies, but it was completely empty. No cashiers, no waitresses, no customers. Just rows of shelves and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. "Hello," I called out. No response. I walked over to the counter and looked around. There was a coffee pot brewing, steam rising from the spout. A cash register sat on the counter, its drawer slightly open. Everything looked normal, like someone had just stepped away for a moment. But no one came back. I poured myself a cup of coffee and took a sip. It was hot and bitter, exactly how I liked it. I stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of the situation. Where was everyone? Why was this place so empty? That's when I heard the voice. "You're early." I spun around. There was a man standing behind me. He was old, maybe in his 70s, with gray hair and deep lines etched into his face. He was wearing a trucker's cap and a worn denim jacket. He looked familiar, like I'd seen him before, but I couldn't place where. "Early," I said. "Early for what?" He smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "For your last stop." A chill ran down my spine. "What are you talking about?" He gestured toward the window. I looked outside and felt my stomach drop. The trucks were gone, all of them. The parking lot was empty, save for my truck, which sat alone in the center of the lot. But something was wrong with it. The cab was dark, the windshield shattered. It looked like it had been in an accident. "What? What is this?" I whispered. The old man walked over to the window and stood beside me. "This is where we all end up. Sooner or later. Every driver who's ever taken the road." "I don't understand." He looked at me, his eyes sad. "You had an accident, about 5 miles back. You don't remember, do you?" I shook my head, my mind racing. "No. I was driving. Everything was fine." "It was quick," he said softly. "You didn't suffer, but this is where you are now, the last stop." I felt tears sting my eyes. No, that's not possible. I'm fine. I'm standing right here." He placed a hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry, son, but the road ends for all of us eventually." I looked back at the parking lot. The other trucks were starting to reappear, one by one, filling the empty spaces. And standing beside each truck was a driver. Ghosts, all of them, waiting at their last stop. I turned back to the old man, my voice shaking. "Is there any way out? Any way back?" He shook his head. "This is the end of the line." I stood there for a long time, staring out at the parking lot, trying to accept what he was telling me. The road had been my life for so many years, and now it was over. I don't know how long I've been here. Time doesn't seem to work the same way in this place. But I see new drivers arrive every so often, confused and scared, just like I was. And I do my best to help them understand. Because this is where we all end up. Every trucker, Every driver who's ever taken the highway, the last stop, and once you're here, you never leave. Some say the road never ends, but I know better. Because I've reached the end, and I'm still here, waiting. Thanks for listening. If you made it through the darkness, maybe leave a light on tonight. You never know when you'll reach your own last stop.